Thank you, Donna. Thanks to all of you for being here. It is such a pleasure to introduce Donna Hazard, who, as you will learn a lot about today, is a general partner and board member of SeaAhead, which is a really exciting Bluetech innovation hub that I'm sure you're going to talk about. But I wanted to talk about how I've known Donna for quite a long time. We go way back. I don't know if you realize this. I did a little math. Over a decade ago to our time at the New England Aquarium. Donna was the board member and then the board chair of the New England Aquarium, which is a really big job because the aquarium is a very dynamic and very engaging place. But here's the thing about Donna. She's what I call a yes and kind of person, which is my favorite kind of person. And for a short while, the aquarium was between leadership, and Donna stepped in as the interim president and CEO while continuing as board chair. Yes, and. Donna has many other amazing accomplishments, including serving as co-founder and vice president of business for the Diagnostics Exact company. And if you've never heard of them, trust me, once you get to be 45 years of age and older, you will very much appreciate them. She has, there's only a few chuckles. You're all too young, but you just remember that. She has over 20 years of service on the board of the Boys and Girls Club of Boston, which again is a yes and. As far as I know, you're still working with them. And considering her leadership roles in youth communities, health science, and ocean science, all of this provides an incredible yes and perspective. When you think about it, it really is all about those three things: the next generation, our health, and the fate of our oceans is the key to thriving life on this planet for both ocean life and human life. So Donna, we're really grateful to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Oh, okay, just somebody. Mike, can you hear me okay? I'm just getting over a head cold, so bear with me if I cough or have to grab my seltzer to keep going. But I am so happy to be with you today. I'm a huge fan of Tufts, and I'm really honored that I was asked to return to build on my participation on a panel last spring. I think that what I'm going to talk to you about today is probably different from what you usually hear, because I'm going to spend a lot of time on investments or investing as a means of practicing ocean conservation and advocacy. And so we will get to that. I think also, hold on a sec. Okay, so I was asked to start with talking a bit about my career path. And so I'm going to kick in with that, my journey. And let me tell you, right from the start, it was not a straight line. So one message I want to convey is that it doesn't have to be. Sometimes taking some side trips is a really good way to live life. Also, admittedly, I want to say that what I have planned for you today is a bit of a smorgasbord. I had been told that there were people with a range of backgrounds in a ranges of stages of life. And what I hope is that I've included something for everybody, that everyone will find something interesting or helpful. But I'm really counting on you during the Q&A to ask questions so we can go deeper in the areas that are really of interest to you. And I'll be sure to leave some time for the Q&A. I also want to point out, well, first, let me talk about what we're going to cover today. So my journey, then the ocean, and in particular, why it matters, and it really matters a lot. And we're going to talk about some of the threats to that as well. Then I want to move to the blue economy. What do we mean by that? And blue tech. And then I'm going to talk quite a bit about investing and how that works in this field, but I think a lot of the messages can be applied more broadly as well. And then we will get to Q&A. So before we talk about the journey, let me start with my why, because I think we should all start with our why. What gets you out of bed in the morning? What fills your soul? And what I have to say is my passion is the ocean. I fell in love with marine life and habitats long before I understood how important the ocean is to our survival and our economy. What started as an emotional, deeply held value for me eventually evolved into a data-driven professional imperative. And that really is the story I'm going to cover. The problem for me was that it took a very long time to figure out how I could make a difference for the ocean. And so I tried a number of different things before I arrived where I am today. And I also want to credit Brian Scarry. You can't really see his name down there, who is an absolutely amazing National Geographic photographer and advocate for the ocean. And if you haven't had the opportunity to do scuba dive or even snorkel, his photographs are one of the thrilling ways to really get to know the ocean. Okay, so my story. Here goes. The first time I put on a snorkel mask and peered under the water's surface at about 7 or 8 years old, I fell in love with the ocean. I was mesmerized by the vitality and variety of life under the sea, and really awestruck by the power and the scope of the ocean. And I still am today. But that passion was completely disconnected from my early career. What was connected was that I was drawn to this intersection of science and business and policy. I spent the early part of my career in biotech. I started as a market analyst. And then I left to get an MBA and to spend some time in strategy consulting, first with Bain & Company in San Francisco, and then working on privatization in Poland. So again, not a straight line. But I spent, after about 1.5 years in Poland, I returned to the United States, and I returned to biotech, tackling with a number of companies really major challenges and threats to human health. Along that line, I took a job as director of marketing and business development at Genzyme, one of the big companies, now part of another pharmaceutical company, and had an incredible run there working on their genetic testing business. But eventually, my entrepreneurial spirit took over, and I left with one of the scientists I worked with there and joined a serial entrepreneur, an amazing guy, and co-founded a company called Exact Sciences, then Exact Labs, which Randy mentioned. And that was an incredible trip. Building a business is an incredible trip, not an easy one, lots of ups and downs and left turns, but an incredible trip, and did result in the Cologuard screening test for colon cancer, which is non-invasive, which is why people for whom it's appropriate appreciate it a lot after age 45 or 50. And then flash forward, about the time Exact was going public, I took some time out. I took time out from my career to focus on raising my kids and becoming more involved in my community, something I hadn't given much to, just been living and enjoying it, but not really contributing. And I wasn't comfortable with that anymore. That was also a great experience. I learned a lot. But eventually I couldn't resist the pull of the ocean. You know, a number of things that happened during that time that had led me to realize how critical the ocean is for life, beyond being a source of, you know, great fascination. And I also realized that the ocean was threatened. And so I kept coming back to this question of what can I do? And as Dr. Rochin mentioned, I joined the board at the aquarium. I became board chair there. I also co-founded a group called Women Working for Oceans. We were an education and advocacy group. And I went back to school. I got another master's, this time in sustainability and environmental management. So while representing the aquarium as CEO, I attended the launch of a company called SeaAhead. And I was immediately fascinated with their vision because they were all about supporting venture creation, scale up and growth in blue tech. And for me, as long as that blue tech was tied to positive outcomes, and it isn't always, but it often is, it just was an area that brought all of my experiences and my passions together. So once we found a long-term CEO for the aquarium, I joined SeaAhead as an advisor, then the first outside board member, and then in early 2020 joined the executive team there. And I had a great 5 years there helping to build their business. This is an update. Building their business, particularly building a network of investors to put capital into Bluetech companies. But I transferred my operating and board roles into a venture partner role and started a group called Vital Ocean Ventures, and did that really so that I could cut back on the amount of time I was spending on management and have more time to work directly with entrepreneurs, and also to support my parents, who are 89 and 92 and living almost 3,000 miles away. And these are the kinds of life events and values that you want to balance. You want to be able to balance in your life with a career and impact on the planet. And that's where I am now. And today I'm going to share with you experiences that draw on my time at SeaAhead and also these early days with Vital Ocean Ventures, which is doing many of the same things with much of the same philosophy. But before we do that, I hear that some people may not be able to stay till the end. So I thought I would share a few lessons learned, if you will, if you'll indulge me. And I hope they're helpful to some of you. The first one is, if you're trying to choose a direction, take an inventory of your skills and do some real self-searching and find that intersection of your passion and what you do well. That's a really good place to start and will serve you well through life. Invest in and maintain the relationships you value in your personal and professional life, and make it a priority to stay connected. You will find that the people you value circle back through your life time and again and just enrich everything you do. Next, and I say this to my kids, and I'll say it to you, ask a lot of questions as you go, but do it respectfully and listen really carefully to the answers you get back. And I say this because I think we should never assume that people who have been doing something longer than we have all the answers. But we should also not assume that they don't. There's room for all of us. And so that can make a big difference in a lifetime. If you know where you want to go professionally, make a plan and go for it. Don't let anything get in your way. But if you don't, that's fine too. Find opportunities that will allow you to acquire skills and learn about industries that will open doors for you, and just keep putting one foot in front of the other. For people who might be graduating from college, I know some of the news is not really encouraging about job opportunities, but there are out there. Your skills are needed. Your interest in the world is needed. So just keep moving forward. And then the last one I'll say is, if you stay healthy, and I really hope you will, there are a lot of things you can do to stay healthy through lifetime, you will have lots of time for many phases in your life. It is nearly impossible, as the great movie was titled, it is nearly impossible to do everything, everywhere, all at once. If you haven't seen the movie, you got to see it. Life events will call on you and cause you to change your focus or your balance. But over time, you can do just about everything if you put your mind to it. Okay, that's enough philosophy. Now, let's get to the core of the presentation. Let's turn to oceans. You've probably seen these numbers or numbers like them somewhere. I'm just going to say right up front, the numbers are rounded, the ranges are large. There's so much uncertainty about how these industries will evolve in the future. The only point you really need to take away is that ocean industries are really large, and that the ocean is providing incredibly important services for all of us. So don't get caught up in the decimal points. That's really the important point. And let me give you some examples. There are so many reasons I could talk to you all day about why the ocean matters, but I'm really just going to hit on two. One is we, and every organism on the planet depend on the ocean for our survival. So the stakes are incredibly high. Over 90% of excess heat from climate change is being absorbed by the ocean. It's an incredible buffer, but even it has limits in its ability to withstand this additional heat. More than 3 billion people on the planet depend upon the ocean as their primary source of protein. 3.3 billion people, or about 40% of the global population, live within 100 kilometers of the sea. And this is for a good reason, because being proximate to the ocean offers all kinds of employment opportunities and other resources. It also means that all those people are at higher risk of being affected directly by detriment or decline in the health of the sea. And then I'll end with one that you've probably heard before, which is that 50% of the ocean we breathe comes from the ocean. That is every other breath you take. And this doesn't even touch on the amazing raw materials, minerals, seaweed, new medicines, lab reagents, all the other elements of the sea that we have learned from and been able to incorporate into daily life. Let's move to my number 2. Is number 1 enough, though? I mean, if we depend on it for our survival, isn't that really enough? Okay, but I'll go on to number 2 for those of you who aren't convinced yet. The number 2 is that our economy, the strength and the growth of our economy, really depend upon the ocean. And I'm not going to go through all these numbers, but I'll touch on some industries. These are just some examples. Maritime shipping conveys more than 80% of trade globally. And as a result, really is one of the underpinnings of the global economy. If you think back to COVID, when shipping was disrupted, that was a mess that impacted our lives, many industries, lots of employment. So that's a very big deal, and it's a huge industry projected to grow significantly. Marine energy, we're talking about waves and currents and thermal conversion, as well as offshore wind, which is wind energy, but located in the sea, which is projected to grow substantially into the future. Despite headwinds, it's a pun, headwinds and slowing in the US and the UK. Circular economy, and I'll just choose one example that's directly related to the sea, and that's biodegradable plastics. Seaweed and other materials are being looked at to try to avoid the incredible impact we're seeing from growing plastic, micro and macroplastic in the ocean. Insurance and coastal resilience. I mean, this one is really striking. Globally, it's expected that climate change will cause 100 trillion in expenditures in coastal areas annually as we move forward over the next few decades. And in the US alone, adaptation and damage done will amount to more than $1 trillion a year, estimates say. Again, these are round numbers. Aquaculture, already greater than a $300 billion industry. I've seen numbers up to 550 billion, but being conservative. And in 2024, aquaculture surpassed in tonnage the volume of captured fish. And then I'm just going to mention marine CO2 removal. This is an area that's hit, again, some really strong headwinds, particularly in the US, for a variety of reasons that all of which we won't go into today. But 2 really important ones are we need better MRV, which is monitoring, reporting, and validation. And we also need carbon credit markets to value carbon removal. And so that is slowing down, but still significant and expected to grow. And there are countries like Japan who've established carbon credit markets that are playing a huge role in funding legitimate, high impact carbon removal projects. Despite this, we are not treating the ocean like it matters. The photos on this slide represent pollution from multiple sources, and marine degradation. Just a couple of factors that are really degrading the health of the ocean. We depend on industry for food, for employment, for our way of life, but there are practices in industrial operations that are really weakening one of our greatest assets. Now, people like me, who I'm not a great scientist, stand on the shoulders of giants like research scientists at this institution and others who've contributed so much to identifying the factors driving degradation of the ocean, and also have invented technologies that really could be part of the solution. With the right resources, I believe, and I'm in good company on this, that we can turn these insights into technologies, into solutions. If we think back to other significant challenges humanity has faced in the past, innovation has often been an essential part of moving forward. Now, yes, we need research, we need wise policy, we need strong leaders, we need all of that to come together. But I don't think it's enough. We need well-designed and well-implemented technology too. That's often a critical piece of the puzzle. And I raise renewable energy, antibiotics, and precision ag as areas where we've seen technology really make a difference, with renewable energy starting to mitigate against the impacts of fossil fuels, improving energy security, protecting resources. Antibiotics, turning bacterial infections that used to be fatal into everyday occurrences, if you will, and allowing invasive medical procedures that could never have taken place without antibiotics. And in precision ag, we see drones and AI data, machine learning, allowing us to get much higher yields with much lower resource utilization and also polluting fertilizers. And the ocean is primed to benefit from technology in the same way we've seen before. Technological innovation is combining with existing and maturing technologies, with regulatory pressure and with economic drivers and real consumer demand to drive progress in areas that can really serve the ocean well and also generate economic growth and investor returns. One other really important point, I think, is that Bluetech, technology serving the blue economy, intersects with many other VC sectors with a lot of growth. And I show some examples here, but we see, for example, Bluetech adopting technology, hyperspectral imaging or others, from food and ag. We see technologies adapted from biotech regularly now. So there's real impetus for forward motion. And I'll also say it works in the other direction, because a technology developed for the blue economy can be adapted to these other fields, and in so doing, add more value and generate more revenue, which feeds this beneficial circuit where we attract more capital to develop technology wisely to get positive impact. So picture this. Imagine a world where affordable aquaculture feeds communities across the globe and takes pressure off of wild fish populations without releasing waste into the environment. Imagine a world where shipping doesn't emit CO2 any longer or transfer invasive species from one port to another. Or imagine a world where plastics no longer threaten to outnumber fish in the sea, which is a real projection right now. I want to give you some, this is the promise of Bluetech, by the way. These are things that people are working really hard to make happen and making great progress on. So let me give you some examples of the types of innovations we're seeing from companies that reach out to us for funding. In shipping, we see innovation in digitization. I mean, for decades, people have used wax paper and crayons to record data in the shipping industry. We're changing that. We see efficiency we see alternative energy sources, tons of innovation there. In aquaculture, we see innovation in data collection, primarily sensors, robotics, and AI, but also new fish feeds with significant economic potential. In renewable energy, we see a host of supply chain opportunities and technologies that facilitate installation and ongoing operations. In coastal resilience, we see innovation in materials that can protect infrastructure and coastal wetlands rather than diminishing them, which seawalls have done for so many years. We've protected our infrastructure, but we've desecrated ecosystems that we rely on. In plastic avoidance, we see innovation in biodegradable plastics and business models that support a fully circular economy. And in blue carbon, we see evolving tools and approaches for measuring carbon absorption and sequestration in order to support legitimate blue carbon projects and credits. So we've talked about why the ocean matters, some of the threats to ocean health, and some examples of innovation to address these threats. Now we're going to turn to early stage investing. What you see here is a list of companies in my personal portfolio. So SeaAhead and I have looked at, it's 1,000 companies at this point, let's say, but these are some that I actually invested in. In the simplest terms, what we do is we look for early stage biotech companies that meet two primary criteria. The first is high potential for generating returns, which I think is critically important because if you can't offer that, it's much harder to attract capital. And if you can't attract capital, you can't reach scale, which means you can't have positive impact at scale. And that's our number two, investing in companies that have high potential for positive impact in the ocean and on coastal communities and all of the rest of us who depend upon the ocean. I would say early stage investors take on a lot of risk and a lot of challenges associated with helping companies that have technology to turn into businesses that can grow and thrive. And SeaAhead and VOV both invest capital and try to provide guidance, connections to industry, and other resources that can help companies along the way. And we think that this is really important for a lot of reasons, because not only do companies need capital, but performing or operating in a competitive marketplace brings a lot of benefits in terms of honing entities so that they can be effective. And some are summarized on this slide. Competitive markets provide feedback quickly. Companies know whether they have a value proposition that anybody is going to adopt. And the feedback also rewards creativity and rewards efficiency as well. Capital helps companies, enables companies to take risks, to make big bets so they can move faster and try more different alternatives. And profit also creates accountability. And that's very helpful in building a business too. So we had this notion that we wanted to feed into this capital issue and use investing as a way of restoring the ocean. I learned about this opportunity and we got serious about it after we launched an incubator, the first Bluetech specific incubator in New England. And we're spending a lot of time doing capacity building, helping companies to figure out their customer product fit, write a business plan, meet potential partners and customers. All of that was going along very well, but even the strongest of those companies had trouble raising money. And the problem was that there wasn't an ecosystem or even an appetite for investing in blue tech companies at that time. And this was about 5 years ago. So we decided to do something about it. And as we discussed, we were in this place where we saw the need, but we had to figure out how we could help. And we didn't have millions of dollars at our disposal to deploy. So we couldn't just, we didn't have that pot of money to go out and invest. And we also didn't have an investment process. So we really looked to thought leaders to figure out how the best way to do this and get it up and running quickly. And what we decided was to form an investor network or an angel group, which we built to about 40 people who look at investment opportunities together and make individual decisions about whether to invest, and then also provide mentoring and other connections. And we call the Blue Angels. The Navy hasn't come after us yet about infringing on their name, fortunately. And then the next step was to really figure out our investment process. And I'm just going to touch on a few factors here. Critically important to have some focus. Unless you're a huge enterprise, a huge investment outfit, you really have to figure out where you want to focus, because you need depth of knowledge, depth of relationships, depth of understanding of where technology stands, and you can't do that everywhere. So we said we were ocean, but the next step was also developing some hypotheses about where the greatest opportunities for impact and returns lie. And so we could go out and be proactive and look for them, find companies that fit that mandate. In addition, we welcomed deal flow or pipeline from our network. That included entrepreneurs who had worked with us previously, other investors who are important for many reasons. One is they all have different perspectives, so you can learn more about what opportunities or risks you might not be taking into account yet. But also, in a company's journey, they have to raise money many times, usually. And so we're trying to assess whether there's going to be investment appetite for a company as it grows, because what we're going to put into the company isn't going to take them all the way. So talking to investors is really important. We also, lots of culling through publications, and I don't just mean scientific journals, blogs, newsletters, anything out there to really know our field as well as possible, and conferences, which help because you get to see companies who pitch, but more importantly, really brainstorm with other stakeholders to have the big picture of the industry and the needs. Diligence, that's when we are interested in a company, we take a really deep dive into understanding the business. It starts with a management team, learning as much as we can about their company from them, but also using that as an opportunity to see if they together have the right skill sets, the right set of abilities, and also whether they get along. I mean, a lot of companies fall apart because the team doesn't work out. These are long-term marriages. It's not just first date. So that's another. Then we go to industry experts to make sure that there's a need and that there are customers out there who will value what the company's offering. Technical experts, what's the core technology? What are its limitations? What are its strengths? What's the intellectual property around that? It goes on from there. There are a lot of areas you want to delve into and to really understand that this company is going to get to a place where they're generating revenue and profit, and the risk associated with the entity is reduced. Because I will say also, over the lifetime of a company, the investors in the mix have different risk-reward profiles. And you want to make sure that the risk is being diminished as the company grows. I also want to mention, is the investment stuff interesting to all of you? I have a few more things I want to say on that, but if it's not really of interest, we can skip it. Keep going a little bit longer? Okay, I won't go into all the depth of my points here, but I thought it would be interesting to tell you that when we talk about investing to buy equity in a company, there are a lot of considerations beyond what we just talked about in due diligence. They're the terms. If you're not leading the deal, so you're not the one negotiating the terms, you have to look at the terms that have been established and decide if you think they're reasonable. And there were plenty of companies that we were interested in, but where we thought the valuation was way too high for us to be able to get a return, or for them to be able to raise capital at higher levels of valuation going forward. And so we walked away. So terms are one. But then I also wanted to say VOV invests through 4 different mechanisms. One of them is direct investment. We look at the company, we decide whether to invest, how much to invest, and then we essentially wire transfer out of our bank account. That's direct investment. Another one is when one investor gets together with a bunch of other investors and we form a new legal entity, often called a special purpose vehicle. And through that, I realized I didn't go forward here. And through that, we all invest as a group in a company. That has benefits for the company. They have fewer individual investors to contend with, a less complicated cap table, but it also has downsides. There's extra cost in establishing that separate entity. The next one is we invest in funds. So SeaAhead, for example, is about to launch a fund to add on top of their investor group. And so we can invest in a fund, our capital will be pooled with other investors. What changes is that we, VOV and other investors in the fund, no longer make the decisions about which individual companies to invest in. Instead, the management of the fund makes those decisions. So you got to really believe in that management team. And then the next one is new and I think really interesting with incredible potential. And I'm calling it a fiscally sponsored nonprofit. And what this is a vehicle that allows investors to invest in a company in the same way you donate to a charity. You get the same tax benefit. It's as though you're making a donation, but it's going into a company that is hopefully going to grow and generate returns. Now, there are restrictions on this, as there should be. The first one is that a company receiving this kind of investment has to be targeting public benefit, like a healthier ocean. If they're not tied to a public benefit, they don't qualify. And the second thing is that there are heavy restrictions on what any upside can be used for. You can't take it and buy a sports car. You can recycle upside into other charities or high impact companies, but can't really go back into your personal account, if you will. I want to put that on the table because there are billions of dollars tied up right now in tax advantaged pools that are not being deployed to do good work. And this is a vehicle to help bring more of that capital into high potential tech companies. So I'm super excited about that. Let's see. I also did want to touch on the different stages of investing very quickly. Pre-seed is really early. You got a founder, you have a concept, maybe you have proof of concept, maybe you have a prototype, probably not. And usually investments at that level come from friends and family, because really what you're investing in at that point is the entrepreneur. So who better to do that than someone who already really knows the entrepreneur? But you do see angels participating at that level too. Seed, we're moving along the spectrum here. Now you should have proof of concept. Maybe you have some early data, and you really need the dollars to expand. You're more likely to see angels and some early venture capital there. Then we move to Series A. Hopefully now you've got some customers, you've got some revenue, maybe it's coming from pilots. But the thing that's really important about revenue is that it shows that a customer out there values what you're doing enough and thinks it has enough potential that they're putting some skin in the game to develop it. And then, B plus, what we're talking about are increasingly larger raises and increasingly higher valuations, hopefully. I will say different people use these terms in different ways, but that gives you the idea of the progression. And then the last one being an exit, which can be an acquisition or an IPO. Now, some companies never go public. They stay private and they just continue to turn out revenue that supports everybody who has an ownership and is involved in the company. And that's fine too. It's not usually as good for investors. Usually there has to be some kind of liquidity event for investors to get their money out. How are we doing on time here? Okay. I'm going to go really fast now. I just wanted to show you that SeaAhead and VOV are not the only people who have these same objectives. There is now, 5 years later, an amazing ecosystem. This is just a smattering of organizations, of universities, of nonprofits, of foundations, of investors, of companies in this ecosystem. But I wanted to tell you it has progressed a whole lot, which is great news. And I also want to say that means what I spend a lot of my time doing is connecting stakeholders. So if I see a company I'm really excited about, then I go out and introduce them to other people who can bring them resources they need to grow, which reduces risk, which we talked about, and increases the chance of success and also accelerates their process or their progress. Let's jump to this one to say, even if you do everything right, you do great due diligence, you find a great entrepreneur, the tech is really interesting, et cetera, investing in this stuff is still risky. And often the founders are first-time founders with a first-time tech going after a first-time market. It's really risk on top of risk. And even if you evaluate the opportunity really well at the beginning, the context changes. So just want to say it is risky. There are all kinds of studies out there about this, but the leading numbers I saw were that 65 to 75% of companies, of early stage companies, fail. And it's for a whole host of reasons you can see summarized here. So this isn't for the faint of heart, and you have to really believe that you can make a difference in this area and pick some winners. And one really big winner can make up for a lot of companies that don't make it, but it is an easy street. So now I'm going to start moving toward a close here. I want to play a little game with you. I am going to read you the descriptions, one-line descriptions of 3 companies. These are descriptions I used in a TEDx talk that I did almost 3 years ago. And I'm going to ask for a show of hands for which one of these companies you think is doing best today, okay? So first one, am I on the right page? Yes. BioFin is applying nanoencapsulation technology. Now think back to COVID and the mRNA vaccines, huge breakthrough. This is kind of a sister technology to that. And they're using it to stabilize the most valuable, often least stable components of fish feed for aquaculture, and also managing to pinpoint the optimal point of absorption in the gut of the fish. So why is this important? Less cost, less waste, and more healthy fish to sell. So higher revenue, higher profitability. That's BioFin. Oceanium is biorefining seaweed to isolate valuable components of all kinds for pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, livestock feed, and non-toxic biodegradable plastic replacements. And in the process, they're driving more seaweed farming with all of its environmental benefits and benefits to coastal communities who are gaining jobs through this industry. And Vinci VR is using virtual reality to drive better economics for large employers by expediting the hiring and training processes to facilitate rapid growth, while also providing equitable access in the blue economy and beyond. Okay, I appreciate that that is not enough information. I already told you how much there is to due diligence, so I'm not going to hold it against anybody if we don't guess right here. But how many people think that BioFin is doing the best? Okay. How many people think Oceanium is doing the best? That's slightly more. And how many people think Vinci VR is doing best? Okay. Well, I'm super sad to tell you that BioFin doesn't exist anymore. And they were working on something really important with a great technology, a wonderful CEO, and the market adoption didn't move fast enough, and raising capital got harder and harder until they finally had to close their doors. On the other hand, Oceanium and Vinci VR are still going on. So that's great. Facing challenges, Vinci was going after offshore wind in New England first. So, as that industry has been slowed down, they've had to diversify into other industries. But a good team can pivot like that when they need to. So, okay, let's wrap this up. Summary. I hope you all believe that the ocean's critically important. I'm sure you're all aware it's declining in health and productivity. I hope you believe that technology is part of the answer. But I can tell you, I can vouch from experience that commercializing technology needs support. It needs a whole lot more than just the technology itself. VOV is aiming to close this gap, and I hope will make a difference in the long run. And with that, let's turn to Q&A. I hope you have some questions.
Thank you so much for that presentation. We do have time for questions, so raise your hand and I'll bring you the mic. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you for this presentation. I think this is really timely. You think about all of the government layoffs in the past year. Trying to think about different ways of creating the kinds of important work that needs to be done. I'm curious. So you're talking about early stage investing. So this is not something you can just go to your broker and buy these companies. I don't know if you can somehow invest in the portfolio, but I'm wondering if you have words of wisdom for maybe a new graduate who is getting their first job and trying to think about managing their retirement account in a way that will have the best possible outcomes in terms of creating good jobs for a vibrant future.
Yeah, there are some money managers who care deeply about matching impact with growth. I would not advise you to go look for a company and make bets on your own right now. Now, if you want to join a firm that's already done this, that has experience, that knows a range of options, that's great. That's great. But if what you're looking at is, I've got a bit of money to work with, I want it to grow, but I want to do good things in the world, then I would go to one of the money managers who cares about that. There also are more ways to do that on a kind of wholesale internet-driven way. And unless you have, I don't know what the threshold would be, it is hard to get a money manager to meet with you individually. So realistically, I think it's a matter of going online and searching for people who are serving up portfolios of companies doing good work and participating with them. I think that's a realistic thing. If you have more resources to work with, then you can go directly to, Calvert is a company in Boston that started caring about making investments that would drive positive change long before a lot of others. But I don't know what their threshold is for personal advising, which is why I'm saying that going online and finding a platform to participate in is a good thing. There are many crowdfunding platforms now, but in my experience, they don't provide enough information for you to necessarily make a good investment decision yourself. So that's why I would advocate more for the portfolio approach.
So I have a question. As I was thinking back to our conference this summer on motion, Jill coined the term the teal economy, which is the blue and the green economy coming together. And I'm wondering to what extent you're seeing investment in efforts that don't directly look like ocean, but they really are ocean because of the terrestrial impact on the ocean.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the teal economy.
Yeah, for sure. So right now we're looking at investing in this cool woman, Navy, who is just a year or two out of college and has designed a system you can use to retrofit stormwater drains. It's got a low profile. You can fit it into a curb to replace an existing stormwater drain, but it filters and it doesn't back up. It doesn't have a lot of the problems that current ones do. So this is fresh water on land, but exactly to your point, we're looking at investing, and beyond that, we're helping Navy raise money right now because the freshwater shed and stormwater runoff has everything to do with coastal ocean health. And so we do a bunch of that. We've supported sensors used in industrial water, like beverage industry facilities, because the quality of the water coming out of those facilities has a lot to do with ocean health. So those would be two examples. Couldn't agree more that it's all linked. And we want to make sure we have expertise to bring to the table to make a good investment decision, to be able to do due diligence, and to be able to be helpful to the entrepreneur. So if it's too far afield, then it's not a great fit for us. But water quality, terrestrial water quality, and also I would say fertilizer runoff are two we look at all the time because they're so closely aligned with our priorities.
Thank you for your talk. It was interesting to learn about like the processes for providing investments and financing for these technologies. And because I imagine that funding can be a pretty big barrier to getting these technologies out there. And I'm curious if you could speak to some of the other barriers that are in place for getting these technologies to be more normalized and mainstream, and if there's methods or approaches that you know of to kind of tackling those.
Yeah, one of the biggest ones we see is getting potential customers to partner, to pilot, and to adopt the technology. And partnering early in product development is so important because, if you have an industry player who's a potential customer and they work side by side with you, they can tell you what they really need, where their pain points lie. And right from the get-go, you can develop the product or the service to meet that need. Then piloting, you need data. You need data to prove that your product does what you say it does, and does it at in a way that gives a good return on investment. And then finally, you need people who will take the leap, will change their current practices, and will buy what you're offering in order for you to generate revenue. And if you aren't progressing along that continuum, it's really hard to attract capital to keep going as well. So I would say we talked about team. That's so important. We talked about capital. The next one on my list was this whole market penetration, market entry, market relationship piece, which can be very hard. And I think the ecosystem slide I showed is really important for that because those players can help to connect you to industry in a way that will lead them to listen and maybe take a chance more than if you just call on them cold. Does that help? Yeah. I have to say, I'm thinking about your question more and more, and it's not a great answer because what you're asking for is actually, I think, very hard to do in a wise way. I want to get your information. I'm going to think about that. Can I circle back to you too? Okay. All right. Next up.
Thank you so much for this talk. Great to meet former aquarium people. I also worked in the animal care team for many years.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great.
My question is, so in the beginning of the talk, you mentioned a couple of times like a circular economy.
Yes.
But then sort of the main theme was like capital allocation.
Yes.
I'm curious because capital allocation seems like a very like linear sort of process. Like you have this slide outlining like pre-seed to exit, which seems very linear. So maybe you can talk a bit about like the reconciliation between the linear capitalist system versus a circular economy.
Oh, okay. First, I want to say something about the linearity because as the capital markets evolve, even though it looks linear on paper, it's often not linear. Like 2021, when we were stuck at home, people were investing in all kinds of companies. Valuations went up. much easier for startups to attract capital at a pre-seed level. Flash forward to 2023, people had invested enough, they were feeling less liquid, they hadn't seen returns yet. Capital markets tightened a little bit. There were concerns about inflation. And so I just want to make the comment that it's not always linear. And a number of companies we know during that time had to actually raise money at a lower valuation than they had the time before, or they did a bridge round to help them get from A to B without any increase in valuation. But having said that, so circular economy works in part because it tends to be cost reducing in some cases or revenue enhancing. So if you can take a waste material, for example, and repurpose that into a raw material for something new or a finished good, it can be win-win because the people who are paying for getting rid of the waste before disposal are going to give you this raw material, or you're going to get it at a reduced price. So there are ways, there are economic drivers beyond the notion of a circular economy being a good thing that are really what are driving these plays. And you know, in seaweed, I've done a lot of seaweed investing, so I'm going to give you an example from there. You know, seaweed in packaging, we have waste seaweed, we have farm seaweed. Right now, there is a disconnect between the cost of farming seaweed and the price point that's acceptable for a manufacturer of packaging. So until we get the cost of the seaweed down, the market opportunity is going to be limited. That's part of the reason why some of the seaweed companies are going for higher value products like pharmaceuticals or nutraceuticals. I still think of it in a way as circular economy because you're using a waste product, if you will, in some cases to make something else rather than taking a resource that could be used for a different product and would be used for a different product to make whatever your new thing is. But the economics are really important, and that's why right now, while we work to drive down the unit cost of production of seaweed, there's certain markets that are really hard, where it's hard to make that work. But what we're seeing with the seaweed companies that are succeeding is that, like Lollyware is one, have you followed them at all? They make plastic utensils and whatnot, and they have done quite well matching the risk as seaweed supply becomes less, as the cost goes down. They've made more and different and better products, and they've been able to ride that capital market through that projection. But there are a lot of, or progression, but there are a lot of companies that haven't. Other circular economy plays in the ocean. Fish skins are being, you know, that would have been waste before, being used for all different purposes. We have a company that identifies invasive species, captures them, and uses their skins to make textiles. And the sales of their textiles feed the armies of people who are going out and capturing lionfish in the sea, pythons in Florida, carp in the Mississippi. And so that's the kind of circle that customers and funders like. I will say with that company Inversa that part of their revenue stream now is managing invasive species problems for states. They're hired for that. So I'm not sure if that was exactly what we were looking for, but there is a misalignment between that progression and lots of businesses, including some of the circular economy businesses. But there also are some great cases where it's working, but it's because the economics work. You know, there's a value proposition there for a buyer that works.